My name is Loretta Quinn, and I'm 64 years old. I've been retired for nearly 6 years now, after working most of my life as a systems analyst for a mid-sized tech firm in St. Louis. I was never flashy, never loud. I preferred a quiet kind of success. Spreadsheets over small talk, compound interest over credit cards. I paid off my home before I turned 50, invested steadily, and never once bought something I couldn't afford. Some might call that boring. I call it freedom. Raising my daughter, Tracy, alone after my husband passed away was the hardest thing I've ever done. She was only 7. He was only 38. 1 minute he was here, humming in the kitchen and dancing with her in his arms, and the next, he was gone. A silent heart attack in his sleep. I didn't even get to say goodbye, but I had no choice. I had to work to keep us afloat, to stay strong for her. Tracy grew up into a smart, driven woman. She married young and had 2 beautiful children, Ben, who's now 17, and Mia, who just turned 12. They're good kids, but like most kids today, they live in a different world. Phones glued to their hands, ideas shaped by TikToks and trends, always rushing, always distracted. And like many grandparents I know, I sometimes feel like an antique piece of furniture. Nice to have around, but ultimately just background. Every Sunday, Tracy brings the kids over for lunch. It's a tradition I started when Mia was born. I make something hearty: roast chicken, spaghetti, pot pie, and we eat together around the same table Tracy and I sat at when she was little. Lately, though, it's felt less like family time and more like a duty they're checking off. Ben rarely looks up from his phone. Mia sometimes just eats and disappears into the guest room to draw. Tracy tries to fill the silence with cheerful updates, but I can feel the distance growing. That Sunday started out the same. I made beef stew, Ben's old favorite. He used to call it Grandma's magic soup when he was little. I thought maybe the smell of it would stir some memory, maybe even gratitude. But when they arrived, Ben barely mumbled hello. He threw himself onto the couch and started scrolling through his phone like the rest of us didn't exist. Tracy looked frazzled, muttering something about work stress and how Ben had been moody all week. We sat down to eat. Ben poked at his food, sighed dramatically, then tossed his fork onto the table. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He didn't even look up. "I'm just tired of watching people who don't do anything act like they've got it all figured out." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You," he said. "You don't work. You just sit around and expect people to do everything for you. Must be nice being useless." The words hit me like a slap. Useless. There was a long silence. Even Mia stopped eating. Tracy's eyes widened and she opened her mouth to say something, but closed it again. She didn't correct him. She didn't defend me. She just stared at her plate like the conversation hadn't happened. I didn't yell. I didn't scold him. I didn't ask him to leave. I just stood up and quietly excused myself. I walked into the kitchen, my hands shaking, and stared out the window at the garden I'd planted with my own 2 hands. Daffodils were blooming. The same kind I planted after my husband died. He always said they were hopeful flowers. Right then, they felt like a cruel joke. Useless. That word rattled inside me. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had made me feel that small, especially someone I loved. I kept thinking, is that really how he sees me? How they all see me? In that moment, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt erased. Everything I had done, every choice, every sacrifice, none of it mattered to them. I was just the old woman who made lunch on Sundays. But something shifted in me as I stood there in that silence. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the realization that I had let myself become invisible. I wasn't going to argue with him. That wasn't my style. But I was going to show them all, quietly, clearly, in a way he'd never forget. I stood in the kitchen pretending to rinse dishes I hadn't used. I gripped the edge of the counter so tightly my knuckles went white. I could hear their muffled voices from the dining room, forks clinking, a half-hearted joke from Tracy, Mia asking for dessert. But none of it registered. All I could hear was the echo of that single word: useless. I wasn't raised to make scenes. I was taught to carry things, disappointment, grief, even disrespect, with grace. But there's a difference between silence and surrender. And right then, in that fragile moment, I wasn't sure which one I was choosing. I glanced up and caught my reflection in the window pane. My silver hair was pulled back in a low bun. My shoulders were a little stooped, my face soft with time. I looked tired, but not useless. No, not that. I thought about the early years after my husband passed, working overnight shifts at the call center, then teaching myself computer programming during the day. I thought about clipping coupons to save every dollar so Tracy could have birthday parties like the other kids at her school. I remembered sleeping on the couch during college visits because I couldn't afford hotels, and then crying alone in parking lots when she got accepted. All of that, wiped away by one teenage boy's careless insult. And what made it worse was that he meant it. He hadn't said it out of anger. He believed it. To him, if you didn't clock in somewhere or make noise about your achievements, you were a non-factor, a dependent, a drain. I had spent my life trying to shield Tracy and her kids from that kind of thinking, and yet somehow it had crept in anyway. I listened for Tracy's voice. Maybe she was defending me now, maybe she was telling him to apologize, but all I heard was the sound of her scraping plates and asking Mia if she wanted to watch a movie later. So that was my answer. She wasn't going to say anything. Not to him. Not to me. I wiped my hands slowly and turned off the faucet. My heart was still beating faster than usual, but I felt hollow. Not angry, not even sad. Just stunned. It's a strange feeling. To realize that the people you've spent your life supporting don't actually see you. Not the real you, anyway. Just a convenient version that fits their narrative. As I walked back into the dining room, I noticed Ben had already retreated to the couch, earbuds in, scrolling through whatever empty nonsense filled his feed. Tracy was helping Mia with her jacket. They were getting ready to leave. No goodbye, no thank you. I stood at the edge of the room, invisible again. "I'll see you next week," Tracy said casually, grabbing her keys. I nodded. "Sure." As they left, Mia gave me a quick hug. Ben didn't even glance in my direction. When the door shut behind them, the silence that filled the house felt different. Not peaceful, vacant. Like someone had turned the volume down on my entire existence. I sat back at the table, now littered with half-eaten stew and crumpled napkins, and let the weight of it all settle in. I wasn't upset that Ben had spoken to me that way. I was upset that no one corrected him. That Tracy, my own daughter, didn't say, "Don't talk to your grandmother like that." That she didn't say anything at all. That silence hurt more than the insult itself. I looked at the empty chair Ben had sat in. Just yesterday, I had slipped a crisp $50 bill into an envelope for his birthday. I'd planned to surprise him next week. He needed money for college applications. I had it ready. But now I couldn't imagine giving it to him. Not because I was being petty, but because something inside me had shifted. This wasn't just about a rude teenager. It was about me finally realizing that I had allowed this narrative to grow. The quiet background grandmother who cooked and smiled and said nothing. I had allowed them to forget who I was, what I had done, what I still knew. That was going to change. Not with yelling, not with guilt, but with truth. Quiet, undeniable truth. I stood up, cleared the table, and began to plan something I hadn't done in years. Not a party, not a trip, but a lesson. One they wouldn't forget. That night, after the house had gone quiet again, I walked from room to room like a ghost. Everything looked the same, yet felt different. Heavier, somehow. I tried to distract myself. I folded the laundry, wiped down already clean countertops, reorganized a kitchen drawer that didn't need fixing. But my hands couldn't keep up with the storm in my mind. The word useless refused to leave me alone. It clung to every surface of my home like smoke. Even brushing my teeth, I heard it, watching the news, watering the African violets on my windowsill. That word rang louder than my heartbeat. I didn't cry, I rarely do. I've learned that tears don't always bring relief, not when they fall in a house with no one to hear them. But I did sit on the edge of my bed and stare at my wedding photo for a long time. There I was, just 22, eyes filled with love and ambition, standing beside George, the man I thought I'd grow old with. He was the only person who ever made me feel like I could do anything. When I got passed over for promotions, he was the one who told me I was smarter than the people making the decisions. When I was nervous about going back to school in my 30s to study systems analysis, he encouraged me to do it. And when he died, I made myself a quiet promise. I'd build a life that would have made him proud. I kept that promise. I worked without complaint, saved without shortcuts, and raised Tracy with everything I had. I never traveled the world. I never wore designer shoes or posted about my wins. But I had achieved more than anyone ever gave me credit for. And yet, my own grandsons saw none of it. I tried to make sense of it. Was this my fault? Had I made myself so small, so invisible, that they forgot there was more to me than casseroles and birthday cards? Had I done too good a job making life comfortable for everyone else? At around midnight, I opened an old box in my closet labeled Important. Inside were my degree, my first promotion letter, and a small notepad filled with financial notes I'd made over the years. A record of every bonus, every stock purchase, every dividend. Each number, each date, felt like a breadcrumb back to my own history. I remembered staying up until 2 a.m. to study stock trends. I remembered the thrill of opening my first Roth IRA. I remembered teaching myself Excel formulas to forecast my retirement savings. I had built something, damn it, and no one seemed to know. As I flipped through my papers, I realized something. Tracy didn't know I owned this house outright. She didn't know that the small pension she mentioned to Ben was only a portion of my income. She didn't know about the portfolio I had quietly nurtured for 25 years. And Ben, he didn't even know what a 401k was. And why would they? I never told them. Not because I was hiding it, but because I thought humility was more important than pride. I thought being kind and present would be enough. I thought that love would always be seen for what it is. But that night, I realized love wasn't always enough. Sometimes you had to tell your story, or else someone else would rewrite it for you. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. I started listing out the things I had done in my life, not for anyone else, just for me, item by item, from the mundane to the monumental. It felt silly at first, but then it started to feel empowering. When I finished, I looked at the paper and saw something I hadn't felt in a while. Pride. Not arrogance, not ego. Just the quiet recognition that I mattered, that I had built a life of value, whether anyone noticed or not. That night, I slept with that paper beside me on the nightstand. It reminded me, I am not a burden. I am not a footnote in someone else's story. I am the author of my own. And I was about to start writing a new chapter, one they wouldn't ignore. The next morning, I woke up early, not because I had anything urgent to do, that's the thing about retirement, but because something inside me had shifted. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't at peace either. I felt alert, sharp, as if something important was waiting to be seen. I made myself breakfast, toast, scrambled eggs, a little blackberry jam, and sat with my tea, staring at the kitchen wall like it held answers. I kept thinking about how little my daughter and grandson actually knew about my life. I'd spent decades keeping things running, keeping people comfortable, but I had become so good at being fine that no one ever asked what was underneath. So I decided to look at my life the way they might, if they bothered to pay attention. I started in the hallway. On the wall were framed photos of Tracy's graduation, Ben as a toddler on my lap, Mia's school art projects, but none of me. Not one. I went to my bedroom next and opened the drawers of my old writing desk. Inside were folders of bank statements, real estate deeds, and my investment records. I pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Roth IRA Personal. It had been gathering dust for years. I opened it and found quarterly summaries dating back to 1998, year after year of slow, steady growth. Boring to some, but to me, each number was a story, a battle won, a reward for every overtime shift, every packed lunch instead of takeout. I kept digging. Another folder labeled Portfolio Diversified Funds. I had invested in 3 mutual funds back in 2004 after reading dozens of books and calling customer service lines for weeks. No one taught me. I taught myself. My hands trembled a little as I looked at the recent valuation. I was worth more than $1 million on paper, not including the house, which I owned outright. Useless. That word kept resurfacing in my mind like a mosquito bite I couldn't stop scratching. Not because I believed it, but because I knew Ben did. And he wasn't the only one. Tracy had once said during a heated discussion about college costs, "Mom, I know you're doing your best with your fixed income." That had stung too, but I let it pass. Now I realized they didn't know anything because I never told them. Tracy thought I had a small pension and lived month to month. Ben assumed I did nothing because I didn't go to an office. No one asked, and I never corrected them. I assumed, naively, that people who love you will see your value without needing to be shown. Turns out, sometimes they need to be told. And sometimes, they need to be reminded loudly. I called my bank and asked them to mail me a full financial summary. I asked for hard copies, the kind you could drop on a table with weight and let the pages do the talking. While I waited for those to arrive, I sat down with a notepad and listed out every asset I owned, including the house, my emergency savings, the CDs I opened 15 years ago, and the little side income I still got from tech consulting jobs I did quietly through referrals. Then something else hit me. Tracy once mentioned she'd looked into applying for financial aid for Ben's college, but they said her household income was too high and that her mother probably couldn't contribute anyway. That stuck with me. It sounded like she had just assumed, or told the office, that I had nothing to offer. I logged into the shared Dropbox folder Tracy had created years ago for family documents. I clicked through and saw something I hadn't noticed before. A college application essay draft Ben had written last fall. In it, he described how his family had always worked hard to get by, and how his grandmother lived on a fixed retirement income, supported by her daughter. The words were right there, and wrong. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being rewritten. My story, my life, was being quietly replaced with a version that fit their assumptions, a version that suited their image of me. Fragile, dependent, background noise. And it wasn't malicious. That almost made it worse. It was casual, unquestioned. They didn't see me because I hadn't made them look, but I was going to. Not out of spite, out of necessity. Because if I didn't, the next generation would grow up thinking their grandmother was someone she never was. And I wasn't going to let that happen. By midweek, I had gathered enough proof to rewrite the version of me my family had quietly constructed. But this wasn't about waving numbers in their faces. It was about clarity. I needed to decide how to show them the truth, not just that I wasn't useless, but that they had underestimated someone who had been their biggest supporter all along. That morning, I took a walk to clear my mind, just a few blocks through my neighborhood. Quiet, tree-lined, familiar. I passed homes I'd watched being built decades ago. I waved at Mrs. Carpenter, who was out watering her lawn, and she waved back with a cheerful, "You're glowing today, Loretta." It made me smile. Strange how people outside your circle can often see you more clearly than those within it. After the walk, I went straight to the small office I still kept in the back of the house. It wasn't much. A wooden desk, a filing cabinet, a computer I barely used anymore. But it was where I had taught myself how to invest, where I'd tracked market trends, where I planned every financial move that brought me to the stable life I live today. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. Michael Delaney, my longtime financial advisor. Michael had been by my side since I opened my first investment account. He was sharp, professional, and had always treated me with respect. Even when I was only investing $100 a month, he never once talked down to me. He never acted surprised when I outperformed the average market return. He knew I did my homework. "Loretta," he said warmly when he picked up, "I haven't heard your voice in too long." "I need a favor," I said. "Can you put together a full summary of my accounts? Current balances, performance history, assets, everything is in print. I want it to look professional, something I can hold in my hand." He paused, then said, "Of course. Any particular reason?" "I think it's time I stopped letting people guess who I am," I replied. There was a smile in his voice. "I'll have it ready for you by Friday." When I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. Not a dramatic transformation, just a quiet realignment, like I had finally straightened my own spine. That evening, Tracy called. It was brief. She asked if we were still on for Sunday lunch and if I could make Mia's favorite mac and cheese. I said yes. Her voice was neutral. No mention of Ben's comment, no apology. That silence still stung, but it didn't shake me like before. This time, I wasn't going to hope they saw me. I was going to make sure of it. I began organizing everything. I pulled together the documents I'd stored for years, home deed, insurance policies, and a list of all the scholarships I'd helped Tracy apply for when she was a teen. I added a few newspaper clippings from my early career, including one where I had been recognized for leading a systems migration at my old firm. It wasn't front-page news, but it was mine. A reminder that I had built something of value, even if I had never made a fuss about it. That night, I laid it all out across the dining room table. Neat stacks, clean folders. My life, documented. Not to brag, not to shame, just to be seen. I called it my legacy file, a way to show them who I was, and still am. I didn't know exactly how I'd present it yet. Would I just drop it in front of Ben like a mic drop? Would I hand it to Tracy quietly over coffee? I hadn't decided. But I did know one thing. I was done sitting silently in the background of my own story. This was no longer about a single insult from a teenager. This was about reclaiming my identity. The one I had buried beneath years of caregiving, of putting others first, of shrinking so they could grow. Now I was ready to stand up. Not loudly, not bitterly, just fully. I didn't need anyone's permission. I just needed to stop asking for it. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Not Tracy, not Ben, not even my sister Camille, who calls every Tuesday to chat about her book club and complain about how her HOA board is trying to ban backyard clotheslines. This wasn't the kind of plan you shouted from the rooftops. It was the kind you moved toward, slowly, quietly, with intention, the way I had done everything else in my life. I spent the next few days preparing. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise suspicion, just subtle steps toward a larger moment. I visited the local print shop and had my financial summary reprinted in a clean bound booklet. Navy blue cover, gold lettering. It looked like something a corporate board would hand out at a shareholders meeting. That was deliberate. Inside were everything I had asked Michael Delaney to include: my retirement account balances, the growth chart from my original Roth IRA, summaries of mutual fund performance over 15 years, and my real estate holdings, which included not only my current home, but a small rental property I'd inherited from my aunt and maintained quietly through a property manager. I slipped the booklet into a slim leather folder and placed it inside a drawer in the hutch by the dining table. It was ready. I wasn't going to wave it around. I wasn't going to spring it on them the second they walked through the door. I would wait for the moment, and it would come. Life has a way of handing you moments. You just have to be still enough to recognize them. In the meantime, I cooked. That Sunday, I made baked macaroni and cheese with sharp cheddar and a crunchy breadcrumb topping, just like Mia liked. I baked fresh dinner rolls and glazed carrots, and I even set out cloth napkins, the ones with tiny embroidered birds in the corner that I usually saved for holidays. I wasn't trying to impress them. I was making a point to myself. I could care and be strong. I could be kind and still command respect. They arrived around noon. Tracy looked tired. She said she'd been up late finishing a project for work. Mia was cheerful and ran to hug me. Ben dragged himself in last, his headphones slung around his neck, his hoodie zipped up even though it was nearly 80 degrees outside. He nodded toward me in what I suppose he thought was a greeting. We sat down to eat. The conversation was thin, awkward in places. Mia chatted about her school's science fair, and Tracy chimed in now and then to talk about work deadlines or car trouble. But Ben barely spoke, except to complain about needing a new laptop because everyone else at school had a MacBook. Then came the moment. Ben, half chewing a bite of roll, glanced at me and said, "Grandma, do you ever get bored, like not doing anything all day?" The tone wasn't as sharp as last time. He was genuinely curious, not malicious, just careless in that teenager kind of way. But that was the moment. I wiped my hands on my napkin, stood slowly, and walked to the hutch. "I'm glad you asked that, sweetheart," I said, calm and warm. "I actually do a lot more than you think." I retrieved the folder and returned to the table. Tracy looked puzzled. Ben squinted at the folder like it was a school assignment. "I want to show you something," I said, placing the booklet in front of Ben. "This is what I've done over the years, while I was supposedly doing nothing." He flipped it open. His eyes darted from line to line, then they stopped. His brow furrowed. "Wait, this is your retirement account?" he asked. "Yes." "You made this much? On your own?" "Yes," I said. "I've managed my own investments for over 2 decades. Every dollar, every decision. I learned, I tracked, I stayed disciplined, and I did it while raising your mother, working full-time, and never borrowing a cent." Tracy leaned over trying to read the page. Her face went still. "You never told me," she said quietly. "I didn't think I had to," I replied. "I thought the way I lived spoke for itself." The silence was different this time. Not empty, heavy with awareness. Ben looked stunned. Tracy looked embarrassed. "I wasn't bored," I continued gently. "I was busy building. Just because I didn't make noise about it doesn't mean I wasn't doing something valuable." No one spoke for a long time, and I didn't need them to. The shift was happening, quietly, in real time. The folder stayed on the table through dessert. Ben didn't touch his phone. Tracy kept glancing at me like she was seeing something brand new, something she should have seen a long time ago. I had never raised my voice. I hadn't demanded anything. I had simply shown them the truth. By the time we cleared the table, the mood in the room had shifted completely. It wasn't awkward, it was alert. There was a new kind of energy. Tracy was quiet, but I could see questions working their way through her mind. Ben, on the other hand, looked like he'd just stumbled into a completely different universe, one where the woman he barely noticed each week turned out to be someone who could outsmart his economics teacher. The folder I had handed them sat on the corner of the table, its navy cover catching the sunlight from the window. Ben kept glancing at it like it might disappear if he blinked too fast. I could tell he wanted to say something, but pride was getting in his way, so I decided to help him out. "You asked earlier if I get bored not doing anything all day," I said, my voice light but clear. "Let me show you what some of that nothing has produced." I went to the drawer beneath the hutch and pulled out a second folder, this one thinner. Inside was a handwritten breakdown of how I built my portfolio, when I bought my first mutual fund, how I diversified after the 2008 crash, why I never panicked and pulled out during the dips, and how compound interest became my silent business partner. I laid the pages out in front of him. This is how I did it. Step by step. I figured it out one lunch break, one Sunday night, one financial podcast at a time. Ben leaned forward. You listen to financial podcasts? I still do, I said. The good ones. He looked at me differently now. Eyes wide, posture straightened. That sullen teenage shrug was gone, replaced by curiosity, respect, maybe even admiration. Tracy finally spoke. Why didn't you tell me any of this? All those years I struggled with money. Why didn't you say you had all of this going on? I looked her in the eye. Because I wanted you to learn how to stand on your own. And you did. I didn't want you to rely on me the way some people end up relying on their parents forever. I wanted you to feel proud that you made it. Tracy bit her lip. I thought you were barely getting by. I feel stupid. You're not stupid, I said. You're just busy, you assumed, and I let you. It wasn't an attack. It was just the truth. Ben finally spoke. So, do you think you could teach me? Like, show me how to do this? How to invest? There it was. The moment I had quietly set in motion. The trap, if you want to call it that. Not to humiliate, but to educate. To flip the narrative without ever raising my voice. I smiled. I'd be happy to, but it's not just about stocks and numbers. It's about patience, about knowing the difference between what looks valuable and what is valuable. He nodded, soaking it in. Most people, I added, spend their lives trying to look rich. I spent mine trying to be free. There's a difference. Ben let that sit for a moment. Then he asked the question that told me everything I needed to know. Do you think I could be like that too? I reached for my tea and took a small sip. You already are, I said. You just don't know it yet. The trap wasn't a confrontation. It was a mirror. I had simply held it up and let them see what they had missed. There was no yelling, no ultimatums, just the undeniable truth of numbers, history, and quiet strength. Later that day when they left, Ben took the folder with him. Tracy hugged me longer than usual and whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. I nodded but didn't dwell on it. She was beginning to understand, and that was enough. I watched them walk to the car, Ben flipping through the pages again as they went. A breeze rustled the trees in my front yard. The same ones I planted years ago with George, back when we were dreaming of a future we never got to finish together. But in that moment, I realized I was finishing it. In my own way, in my own time. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting something new too. It happened the following Saturday. I was in the kitchen chopping celery for soup when I heard the doorbell ring, not once but twice in quick succession, a little impatient, a little urgent. I wiped my hands and opened the door. There stood Tracy. No kids, no groceries, no polite smile. Just her, arms folded across her chest, an expression I couldn't quite read. Somewhere between embarrassment, frustration, and disbelief. I need to talk to you, she said. I stepped aside, nodded, and let her in. She walked straight to the dining table and sat down, not even waiting for me to offer tea. That alone told me this wasn't going to be one of our usual surface-level mother-daughter chats. I sat across from her waiting. She placed the financial folder, the one Ben had taken home, on the table between us. It looked untouched, but I knew it wasn't. I read it, she said. All of it. I nodded slowly. And? I don't know where to start, she said, her voice sharp at first, like she was trying to hold something in. I'm confused. I'm angry. Not at you, at myself, at everything. I waited again. I had learned long ago that silence has power, especially when someone is finally being forced to listen to their own voice. I always thought you were just managing. That you'd worked hard, sure, but that you were just getting by in retirement. I didn't know you were this strategic or this successful. Why did you think that? I asked gently. She exhaled, visibly deflating. Because you never said anything. You never corrected me. You let me think I was the strong one, that I was carrying you. I never needed carrying, I said, but I never needed applause either. I raised you to be independent. I thought I was helping by staying out of your way. Tracy looked down at her hands. I've said things to Ben. About you. About how you just cook and knit and do crossword puzzles. I've told him you didn't really understand modern finance. You told him I was useless. She flinched. I didn't use that word, he did. But you didn't correct him. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. Number, I didn't. There it was. Not just the realization that she'd misjudged me, but that she'd passed those judgments down to her son. That hurt her more than anything I could have said. Why didn't you show us sooner? She asked, her voice small now. I paused before answering. Because I wanted to be seen for who I am, not what I have. I didn't want to buy your respect. I thought I had earned it through everything I'd already given. The time, the support, the sacrifices. But I was wrong. I thought you understood me. You didn't. And part of that is on me. I let the silence speak for me. Tracy looked shattered. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, Ben told me he wants you to mentor him, financially. Teach him everything you know. He even said you're the smartest person he's ever met. That made me smile, but I stayed composed. I'd be happy to teach him, but not because he's finally being polite, because he's finally curious. That's the first real step toward growth. She looked up. And me? I met her eyes. That's up to you. I'm not angry, but I'm also not rushing back into invisibility. She stood slowly, walked around the table, and put her arms around me. She didn't say she was sorry again. She'd already said it once. This wasn't about apology anymore. This was about recognition. She held on tightly like she was trying to anchor herself to something she'd taken for granted for too long. You're not just my mom, she whispered. You're a damn force. I laughed, then kissed her on the cheek. I always was. You just stopped looking. That was the showdown. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just truth. Delivered plainly, patiently, and without apology. And that made it more powerful than any confrontation could have been. After Tracy left that afternoon, the house was quiet again. But for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel empty. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I stood by the window, watching the wind stir the branches of the old magnolia tree in the front yard. That tree had been here since George and I moved in. He planted it with his bare hands, said it would outlive us both. And now, watching it sway in the warm spring air, I felt like something inside me was also finally settling back into place. That evening, Ben called. Hey, Grandma, he said. Do you have time to talk? I always have time for you, I replied. His tone was different. No teenage snark, no forced politeness. It was earnest, real. I started reading through that stuff you gave me. Some of it went over my head, but I was thinking maybe we could talk every Saturday. You know, like a little finance club or something. I smiled but kept my tone steady. You sure about that? I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. You'll have to read, listen, write things down. I want to learn, he said without hesitation. So we set a time. Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. And just like that, our routine began. We started small. What a mutual fund actually is, how inflation eats away at savings, why it's more important to understand long-term growth than to chase quick wins. I assigned him simple tasks. Read a chapter, watch a video, create a mock investment portfolio. He took it seriously. And not just because he wanted money, because he wanted to understand. We met at my house. I'd make muffins or banana bread, pour 2 cups of tea, and we'd sit at the dining table, the same one where he'd once carelessly insulted me. Now, he took notes there. He even gave our Saturday meetings a name. money and muffins. Each week I saw him grow, not just in knowledge, but in character. He asked thoughtful questions. He started holding doors open. He brought his dishes to the sink. Little things, but they meant everything. Respect doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it sneaks in, one small gesture at a time. One morning he looked up from his notes and said, "I used to think being rich meant having a big house and a fast car. Now I think it means having options." That's when I knew he was starting to get it. Tracy, too, had begun showing up more, not out of guilt, but out of interest. She'd pop in after work, bring a bottle of wine, and sit at the kitchen island while I cooked. One night, as I diced onions, she said quietly, "I've been talking to a financial advisor. I want to start investing, too." I looked over at her. "I can help you." She nodded. "I know, but this time, I want to do the work." We didn't need to say more than that. The distance between us was shrinking, not because she was leaning on me now, but because she finally saw me clearly. I didn't flaunt my wins. I didn't scold anyone. I just lived in my truth, and eventually it spoke louder than anything I could have shouted. Neighbors started asking if I was mentoring kids. Ben must have talked. Even Mia asked if I'd help her start a savings jar. "Like an emergency fund, but for art supplies," she said. I told her that was the smartest idea I'd heard all week. I didn't need recognition, but what I got instead was better: relevance, respect, and connection. I had quietly rewritten my role, not by demanding it, but by earning it again, this time in full view. There was no announcement, no celebration, just a steady shift in the air. A house that felt less like a museum and more like a classroom, a sanctuary, a home again. Victory doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like your grandson, sitting across from you, asking questions about Roth IRAs between bites of blueberry muffin. Sometimes it's your daughter saying, "Thank you," and meaning it in a way she never had before. That's what peace feels like. That's what winning quietly looks like. It was a Thursday morning. Clear skies, the scent of jasmine from the garden drifting in through the open window, when I found something that stopped me in my tracks. I had just finished cleaning the guest room when I noticed a small notebook resting on the desk. It wasn't mine. The cover was dark red, soft leather with the faintest gold lettering on the bottom right corner that read, "Ben." Curious, I sat down and flipped it open. At the top of the first page, written in careful block letters, was the title, "Life Lessons with Grandma Loretta." I blinked. My throat tightened. Below that were bullet points. Some neat, others scribbled quickly as if written in a hurry not to forget. Invest consistently, even if the amount is small. Never spend more than 70% of what you make. Freedom is more valuable than looking wealthy. Let silence be your power, not your prison. Being underestimated is the greatest advantage. Each line hit me harder than the last. These weren't just facts I'd told him during our Saturday money and muffins sessions. These were values, principles I had lived by, and now they were etched in his own handwriting into something permanent. I ran my fingers over the page and closed my eyes. A quiet smile formed on my face. He had been listening. I hadn't needed to shout, argue, or defend myself endlessly. I had simply told the truth, and the truth had landed exactly where it needed to. I placed the notebook gently back on the desk, exactly as I had found it. I didn't text him. I didn't bring it up the next time he came over. I let it be, because that moment wasn't mine to control. It was his to live. Later that weekend, Ben showed up a little early for our session. He had 2 muffins in a brown paper bag and said, "Your lemon ones are better, but I wanted to surprise you." He sat at the table, opened his laptop, and said, "So, I was thinking about starting a YouTube channel, like teaching kids about money, but in a way that's not boring. You think that's dumb?" I raised an eyebrow. "Do you think it's dumb?" "No," he admitted. "I think it's actually kind of smart. I mean, nobody taught us this stuff at school." I nodded. "Then do it. Just don't forget to credit your very stylish, very wise co-founder." He laughed. Obviously. That was it. That was the moment I knew the story had turned. Not just for me, but for him, for Tracy, for all of us. My life hadn't changed in any flashy way. I still lived in the same cozy house with the creaky front step and the overgrown lavender bush. I still clipped coupons and drank the same brand of tea I had for 20 years. But how they saw me had changed. And that made all the difference. Tracy and I began cooking together again. She'd bring over recipes she'd seen online, and we'd laugh about how they always used 5 cloves of garlic for everything. One night, as she was washing dishes, she said softly, "You were never invisible." I was just looking in the wrong direction. I didn't need to respond. Her saying it aloud was enough. Sometimes redemption isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's a whispered truth, a look held 2 seconds longer, a notebook left behind on a desk, full of the wisdom you didn't think anyone noticed. That was my final word, not a speech, not a grand announcement, but a moment, quiet, meaningful, and mine. As I sat that evening by the window, a soft breeze brushing my cheek, I thought of George. I imagined him sitting beside me, smiling that quiet, knowing smile he used to give when something important had just happened and didn't need explaining. He would have been proud, not because I won, but because I did it my way, with strength, with grace, without raising my voice. And now my grandson was starting to listen, not just to me, but to himself. That, in the end, is the legacy I wanted. Not numbers on a page, but seeds that grow long after you're gone.